The afternoon sun was low in the sky over Los Angeles. It made long golden lines on the tall buildings and busy streets. The city was alive with noise, cars honking, people walking fast, talking, laughing. But for Keanu Reeves, everything felt far away, like he was inside a quiet bubble. His black car moved smoothly on the hot road. The windows were dark, keeping the bright sunlight out. The soft sound of the car's engine was the only thing he could hear. Keanu liked driving at this time of day. It was one of the few times he could be alone, away from flashing cameras, away from people expecting things from him. He had just left a charity event. He had given a speech, shaken hands, smiled for pictures. He knew these events were important. They helped people. But still, every time he felt a little empty afterward, like no matter what he did, the world stayed the same. He let out a quiet sigh and loosened his tie. The radio played a slow, sad song, but he wasn't really listening. The warm sunlight came through the windshield, mixing with the cool air from the car's air conditioner. The city moved past in colors and sounds, but Keanu didn't feel part of it. It was a beautiful day, a normal day. But inside he felt something heavy, something he couldn't explain. Keanu slowed his car and stopped at a red light. The road ahead was long, full of cars moving fast. On the sidewalk, a man rode his bicycle slowly. A group of tourists took pictures near a big painting on a wall. Everything looked normal. But then Keanu noticed a black car pulling over on the other side of the street. There was no reason for him to pay attention to it. People parked their cars all the time. But something made him watch a little longer. The passenger door opened. A man stepped out. He didn't look special. Dark jeans, a light jacket, a baseball cap covering part of his face. His movements were quick, like he had a job to do. Then Keanu saw it. The man went to the back of the car and opened the rear door. There was a short pause. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then something small jumped out. Or maybe it was pushed out. A dog. Keanu blinked. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He expected the man to look back, to hesitate, to say goodbye. But no. Nothing. The man didn't even glance at the dog. He just slammed the door shut. The black car's tires made a sharp sound as it sped away, disappearing into traffic. And just like that, the dog was alone. Keanu felt something squeeze in his chest. The dog didn't run after the car. It didn't bark. It didn't cry. It just stood there, completely still. The traffic light turned green. A loud horn honked behind Keanu's car. He clenched his jaw. He had two choices: drive away or stop. He hesitated. He glanced in his mirror. The dog was still standing there. Another horn honked. With a sharp breath, Keanu pressed his foot on the gas and drove forward. For a moment he thought that was it, the end of the moment. But something made him check the mirror again. And what he saw made his heart skip a beat. The dog was looking straight at him. Not begging. Not hopeful. Just empty. Keanu swallowed hard. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who had already given up. A quiet curse slipped from his lips. Then, in one quick motion, he turned his car to the side of the road. The black Mercedes came to a smooth stop. For a moment he just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, breathing a little heavier. The dog still hadn't moved. Keanu closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath. Then he opened the door. The warm afternoon air touched his face. The sun painted everything gold. The pavement was hot, but Keanu ignored it. His eyes were only on the dog. He crossed the street slowly, step by step. As he got closer, he noticed more details. The dog was small. His short, dark fur was dirty and messy. He could see its ribs beneath its thin body. But the worst thing? It wasn't how the dog looked. It was the way the dog acted. Most stray dogs ran away when people got close, or barked in fear. This dog? It just stood there. Keanu crouched down, trying to look smaller, trying not to scare it. "Hey," he said softly. The dog didn't react. It blinked very slowly, like it barely noticed him. Keanu frowned. Something was wrong. He looked around. Did anyone else see this dog? Was anyone missing it? But the city kept moving. People kept walking. Cars kept driving. No one noticed. No one cared. Keanu tried again. He lowered the car window a little and called out. No response. The dog didn't flinch. Didn't turn its head. It was like it didn't expect anything from the world anymore. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. For a moment he thought the dog might move. But then instead it lowered its head. Like it had already accepted its fate. Keanu hesitated. Something about this wasn't right. He had seen abandoned animals before. They usually ran, or barked, or searched for food. But this dog? It just stood there, like it had been left behind too many times before, like it knew no one would come for it. Keanu swallowed hard. Before he even realized it, his feet moved. He walked closer. The dog was even thinner up close. Its fur was rough and knotted. He could see old scars beneath the dirt. But the worst thing? Its eyes. They were tired. Empty. Like the dog wasn't even really alive inside. Keanu lowered himself to a crouch again. "Hey," he said softly. The dog blinked slowly, but didn't lift its head. Keanu frowned. Something was very wrong. Even dogs that had given up should still react. They should still try to survive. Run. Flinch. Shrink away. But this dog? Nothing. It just stood there. Keanu's fingers tightened into a fist. He knew that feeling. He knew it all too well. He took a deep breath, pushing away the memories creeping into his mind. And then he focused on the dog again. "You okay, buddy?" He knew the question was silly, but the words came out anyway. No response. Keanu looked around again. People kept walking. No one noticed. Had this dog been standing here for minutes? Hours? Did anyone care? Keanu's jaw clenched. He reached out his hand, palm open, hoping. Nothing. The dog didn't even flinch. Keanu's stomach twisted. He had seen wounded dogs before. Seen fear. Seen hesitation. But this was worse. This wasn't fear. This was surrender. The dog's fur was rough. Its legs were thin. Its body is covered in old wounds. Keanu didn't even realize he was holding his breath. His throat felt tight. He should leave. This wasn't his problem. But his feet wouldn't move. And then, in his mind, he heard something someone once told him. Sometimes, the ones who have suffered the most are the ones who never ask for help. Keanu let out a long breath. He had made up his mind. "All right, buddy," he said. "Let's get you out of here." He walked forward. Kneeling down, he took off his suit jacket. Slowly, he draped it over the dog's back. The fabric was soft, still warm from the sun. The dog didn't react. No shaking. No wagging its tail. No trying to run. Just quiet acceptance. And in that moment, Keanu knew. This dog needed him. And he wasn't going to walk away. Keanu's stomach felt strange, like when you're really nervous. He bent down carefully and slid his arm under the little dog's body to pick it up. But as soon as he touched it, he felt something, a tiny shiver. It wasn't from the cold. It was from fear. Keanu froze. He hadn't squeezed the dog, hadn't hurt it, but still the dog tensed up. It was stiff, like it was waiting for something bad to happen. Like maybe someone had hurt it before. Keanu's heart ached. Slowly he looked down at the dog's neck. That's when he saw it, a collar. It was old, dirty, and worn out. A small, round tag dangled from it. But when Keanu looked closer, his chest tightened. The name on the tag had been scratched off. Not faded. Not rubbed away over time. Scratched off on purpose. Someone had erased this dog's name. What? Had they wanted to forget the dog ever existed? Had the dog been abandoned because someone didn't want it anymore? Keanu's jaw tightened. He felt a deep anger, one that sat heavy in his chest. He almost never let himself feel that way, but now he did. He just couldn't understand. How could someone look into the eyes of a small, helpless dog and decide to erase it? To act like it had never been loved, never been important? His hand hovered over the dog's collar, feeling how rough and worn it was. The dog didn't move. Just watched him. Not scared. Not excited. Just watching. Keanu let out a slow breath. This wasn't about being angry. Right now this little dog was here. It was alone, abandoned, but alive. And as long as it was alive, Keanu had a choice. He could help. Keanu carefully slipped his fingers under the collar. It was loose, too big for the dog's thin body. The buckle was old, with tiny rust spots on the edges. He adjusted it a little. The dog still didn't react. And then Keanu felt something under the collar. His stomach twisted. Scars. Tiny ones but real. Old wounds. Marks left behind by pain. Someone had hurt this dog. More than once. Keanu clenched his jaw. His fingers dropped away from the collar. He looked down at the little dog. It was still just watching him. Keanu took a deep breath and reached for his jacket. It was still wrapped around the dog's back, keeping it warm. Gently, he adjusted it, making sure the dog was snug and comfortable. The dog blinked. It didn't resist. It didn't fight. Keanu's chest felt heavier. He straightened up and looked around. The city streets stretched before him, covered in long shadows as the sun started to set. People walked by, cars moved through the streets, but no one had noticed the dog. No one had stopped. No one had even looked. Keanu ran a hand through his hair. He hated that. How could a little dog like this be all alone and no one even cared? He looked down again. The dog was still standing there. Still waiting. Waiting for what? For someone to leave it behind again? For the world to forget it completely? Keanu exhaled sharply. No, not this time. He made his decision. Come on. Keanu turned and walked toward his car. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. And then, a sound, soft, small, so quiet he almost missed it. The tiny shuffle of paws on pavement. His heart squeezed. Keanu slowed down just a little. He reached his car and opened the back door. Then for the first time he turned around. The dog was standing a few feet away. It had followed him. Not running. Not excited. Just enough. Keanu crouched down, resting his arm on his knee. It's okay, he said gently. He motioned toward the open car door. The dog didn't move. Keanu waited. Was this it? Had the dog followed him this far only to stop now? Had it been left behind so many times that it didn't know how to be taken along? Keanu tapped his fingers lightly against the car door. I'm not going to hurt you, buddy. The dog just stood there. Keanu took a slow breath. Then carefully he pulled his jacket off the dog's back and placed it inside the car. He made sure it was spread out like a little nest. Then he backed away. The choice was the dog's. The little dog looked at him. Then at the car. Then back at him. Keanu held still. A long moment passed. And then, a single step. Then another. Then, carefully the dog climbed inside the car. Keanu let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Gently he closed the door. The dog didn't flinch. It didn't panic. It just lay down on the seat, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Keanu swallowed the lump in his throat and got into the driver's seat. His hands rested on the wheel, but he didn't start the car right away. He just sat there, thinking about this little dog, about how easily he could have just walked away, how close this life had come to being erased. Keanu glanced in the rearview mirror. The dog was curled up on the seat, not asleep, not scared, just there. And for the first time, Keanu wondered, what if this wasn't just about saving the dog? What if the dog was saving him too? He shook the thought from his head, started the engine and pulled onto the road. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The house was quiet. Golden sunlight stretched across the wooden floor, soft and warm. Keanu stood in the doorway watching the dog. It was curled up near the edge of the room. It hadn't been explored, hadn't sniffed around, hadn't wagged its tail. It was just waiting. For what? Keanu looked down at the dog's collar. The name tag was still there, but something was wrong. The letters on it had been scratched off on purpose. Someone didn't just leave this dog behind. They wanted to erase it. Keanu ran his fingers through his hair and sighed. Who would do something like this? He knelt down slowly, careful not to scare the dog. He reached out and touched the collar. It was old and worn. His fingers brushed over the empty name tag, feeling the rough scratches where a name used to be. Someone had tried to make this dog's name disappear. Keanu's chest felt tight. Who did this to you? He whispered. The dog blinked but didn't move. Keanu sighed again and leaned back on his heels. He didn't know why this bothered him so much. Maybe because he knew how it felt when other people tried to change your story, to take parts of your life away. He wasn't going to let that happen to this dog. Not anymore. Keanu stood up and walked to the kitchen. He filled a small bowl with water and placed it on the floor near the dog. A long moment passed. Then finally the dog took a step forward. It sniffed the water, then drank. Keanu let out a breath. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And sometimes, a small start was all you needed. The house was quiet. The warm evening light shone through the windows. Keanu sat on the couch, watching the dog from across the room. The dog had moved just a little. But that little movement meant something. It had chosen to drink the water. It had chosen to be here. Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're safe, buddy, he said softly. The dog blinked but didn't look away. It was the longest it had looked at him. Keanu had seen this before, not in animals but in people. People who had been hurt. People who had learned not to trust so easily. Keanu moved slowly, lowering himself to the floor. The dog tensed just a little. I'm not going to hurt you, Keanu said gently. His voice was calm. He reached out his hand, palm up, and waited. The dog watched him for a long time. It didn't move. Then very slowly it leaned forward. Its nose barely touched Keanu's fingers. Just for a second. Then it pulled back. Keanu smiled a little. It wasn't much, but it was trust. The first step. And sometimes that was all you needed. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the big windows of Keanu's house. The wooden floors glowed in the light. Outside, the world was already awake. Cars hummed in the distance, birds sang in the trees. But inside, everything was quiet. Keanu sat on the couch holding a cup of coffee. His eyes drifted to the dog. The dog was watching him, not scared, not unsure, just watching. It had slept near the doorway, curled up in a small ball, not stretching out. I still wasn't sure if this place was home. Keanu took a sip of his coffee. "You hungry?" he asked. The dog didn't react. Keanu set his cup down and stood up. He walked to the kitchen, grabbed another bowl, and filled it with food he had bought the night before. It was simple food, but good enough. He placed the bowl on the floor and stepped back. The dog looked at the bowl. Then it looked at Keanu. Slowly, carefully, the dog stood up. Keanu stayed still. The dog walked to the bowl and started to eat. Keanu watched in silence. When the dog finished eating, it sat near the couch, looking at him. It wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't nervous. There was something different in its eyes. Something like understanding. Keanu took another sip of coffee, feeling the warmth wake him up. It had been a long night. Not just because of the dog, but because of the phone call. The voice on the other end had said, "I know about the dog. It's not the first time they've done this." Keanu couldn't stop thinking about those words. Who did this? Why did they erase the dog's past? His phone buzzed. He picked it up. An unknown number again. Keanu answered. "Yeah." Pause. Then the same voice from last night. "Do you still have the dog?" Keanu's jaw tightened. "Yeah." Another pause. "Meet me in 1 hour. I'll send the location." Keanu exhaled slowly. "Why should I trust you?" The voice was calm. "Because I'm trying to stop this. And if you care about that dog, you should too." A text came through. Then the line went dead. Keanu lowered his phone. His eyes went to the dog. The dog wasn't afraid of him anymore. It wasn't excited either. But something had changed. Something small. Keanu ran a hand over his face. He didn't know what he was about to walk into. But one thing was clear. The past wasn't done with this dog yet. And neither was he. Keanu parked his car. The dog sat quietly in the back seat. A man stood nearby waiting. Keanu got out of the car. "Who are you?" The man sighed. "I've been tracking this for months. But without proof, no one listens." Keanu frowned. "Tracking what?" The man's voice was serious. "You found one of their failures. That means you have something they don't want exposed." Keanu glanced at the dog. The dog sat still. A discarded life. And now, someone wanted to erase it completely. Keanu's voice was low. "Does it have a name?" The man hesitated. Then he said, "Jackie." Keanu's breath caught. "Jackie." Keanu looked at the dog. The dog didn't flinch. Didn't react. But something about the name felt right. Like it had always been there. Like it had just been waiting for someone to say it. Keanu exhaled. "Not anymore," he said. The man frowned. "What do you mean?" Keanu turned back to the dog. His decision was already made. "Whatever they tried to erase," he said, "I'm giving it back. The name. The life. Everything." The man studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Then you better be ready," he said. "Because they're not going to like that." If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.